All right, all you cool cat and kittens, let's get started. So I'm Monica Duran, and I'm a customer success manager here at WorkRamp. WorkRamp is the leading end-to-end training platform for educating employees and customers at scale. We're a unified learning management system that allows companies to share and create training content across multiple teams and provide an amazing education experience for customers. WorkRamp has the best-in-class learner and trainer experience, analytics, and integrations to help teams scale at top companies like Zoom, Square, Slack, and Divvy. And with that said, we have one of my rock star customers who I personally look up to, Stephanie Middaugh from Divvy. Steph, do you want to go ahead and give a brief introduction?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Stephanie. Coming to you live. I got my full face makeup on today, so you guys are in luck. I have been at Divvy. I just celebrated my 1 year, and I am kind of like in charge of sales enablement there, along with my specialist, Scott. And we're big fans of WorkRamp. Super excited to participate here and like share what I know with everybody on the call and anybody who might listen to the recording. I am by no means an expert, but I have ideas and I like to share those ideas. So that's me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that introduction. So now let's dive into the topics for today. So this morning we'll be chatting with Stephanie on how she built and scaled the sales enablement program over at Divvy, and who is listed as Forbes' next billion-dollar startup that more than quadrupled its revenue in a year and experienced a 928% headcount growth in the last 2 years, which is insane. So yes. As I mentioned, we're lucky to have Stephanie here today, who is a LinkedIn top voice in sales for 2019. So if you aren't connected with her on LinkedIn, look her up. She's amazing. I highly recommend it. She also brings tons of enablement experience from DataStax, Alteryx, Sage, and now Divvy. From startups at various stages to large corporations, Stephanie has seen it all. So with that said, we will cover 3 topics today and spend about 15 minutes on each one. So the first one we'll cover Stephanie's learnings from building an enablement from the ground up and where she recommends you start and how to identify the low-hanging fruit. Then from there, we will discuss how to scale sales enablement the right way during hypergrowth. So remember, Divvy exploded with 928% headcount growth in the last 2 years. So she's got it down. Then lastly, or maybe, she's been learning.
Try.
Right? Then lastly, we will cover tips on tool adoption and rep engagement. So a topic that's especially hot during COVID right now. This last topic is also one of my favorites, so I'm really excited to dive deeper into it with everybody. And before we get started, I would like everyone to know that who is joining. If you have any questions, be sure to drop them in the Q&A box and we'll get them at the very end.
Monica, right. I need you to introduce me at all events or anything from now on. I think it's just going to take you along with me.
Do you want a walk-up song too? I could get that going.
Yeah. Heck yeah.
Okay, so for our first topic, which is learnings from building an enablement program from the ground up, could you share with us some tips on starting an enablement program from scratch?
Yeah. So there are, whether you're like coming into nothing or you're coming into like a full-blown enablement program, like my biggest recommendation is basically to just go in and observe. Like, don't come in guns a-blazing and like start kind of changing things based on what you think. Like, my biggest recommendation is just come in first and observe what's going on. Enablement programs are going to be different at just about every company that you're at least that's been my experience. So there's not just a template or a playbook for all enablement programs, depending on like where you go. It should be shifted and molded depending on your business, the size of your company, where they're at, their market, etc. So come in first, observe what's going on, and then start identifying what are some of the things that can make the biggest impact with maybe the least amount of like hard work, like right up front. Like, what's the low hanging fruit? What are things that you can tackle right off the bat?
And what would you say those are?
So it kind of depends on your business. When I came into Divvy, one of the first things that I noticed was that we had no content management strategy, at least nothing that was like set in stone. And we were like startup world, like we were still under 300 employees when I joined. So we didn't have a lot of content, but the stuff that we did have was just living in Slack. So it was an easy thing for me to just identify, like, well, I just need to grab all of the content and put it in one central location for people to be able to like access and reference, instead of having like 100 pinned Slack items in the sales channel. Like, that's just insane. So it kind of all depends on like where your business is at. When I was at DataStax, when I first came on board, I was kind of put in charge of like revamping and taking a look at their onboarding program. And that can be one of the easy things to kind of go in and start tackling right off the bat. So it depends on where your business at. Get input from like other people across the sales floor, if you're supporting revenue as a whole, talk to the executives, talk to frontline managers, find out where the gaps are.
Right. Awesome. Well, actually, this next question that I have for you is something that I even learned a little bit more on when we did our dry run with this, which is, how would you go about comparing enablement versus training / L&D?
Yeah. So usually, like in my experience, enablement comes a little bit before like a true learning and development. And a lot of times L&D will sit under like human resources, and their goal is to kind of help learning and development across the entire company as a whole. Enablement's usually only set for like sales or revenue. It's starting to expand kind of across. But really what I kind of see is like enablement will take from like onboarding all the way through promotion, through the entire life cycle of a person at your organization.
Mm-hmm.
And their goal is to not just train people, but also to help present the information. Are they doing are they using the right tools? Are they kind of getting all of these things? Learning and development a lot of times is more on usually on like the professional aspect of things. How can you grow as a person, as a professional, as a human being?
Right.
And a lot of times, like if you're trying to use like enablement and L&D should work really closely together to make sure that you're mixing kind of everything together. But instead of like going in and just kind of like rattling everything together in a big like bowl, you kind of like fold it in gently. So if you've got, say, a promotion plan, which is something that we've tried started implementing at Divvy, if you've got an L&D program, like start looping in kind of those folks to make sure that you're including the resources that they will inevitably have access to that you in enablement might not.
Got it. Well, actually, one of the questions that I think we got from one of the people attending is, how many people at Divvy create content at WorkRamp? And do you try to keep it contained, or anyone can be a creator? I think that's a really great question, because so many people who come on with WorkRamp, they will give way too many admin permissions, and then there's just a mess. So if you want to go ahead and tackle that question, Stephanie.
Yeah, when we were demoing WorkRamp, we were really excited about the idea of kind of making training and content development democratized across the entire organization. But I was worried about letting the keys to the castle too quickly. So we actually kept it in-house originally. So it was just me and my sales enablement specialist that were creating the content in WorkRamp. And then we slowly started opening it up once people got a feel for the platform and the way that we really wanted to kind of like put stuff out there. We actually ended up, our HR team brought it on board. So we actually do use WorkRamp across the entire organization. So now we have HR in there. We've got like our IT team is in there too. And they're putting together like compliance training and like security training and stuff like that. I organize everything into folders, and I tell them like, this is your sandbox. Don't go play in anybody else's sandbox. This is yours. And like, don't like go deleting other people's stuff. And luckily we've been able to do pretty well with that so far.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So now on to onboarding strategies versus ongoing development strategies. What is your input on that?
So onboarding and ongoing can be two separate like ideas and strategies, but they should also mix. So as an example, when I came into Divvy, we didn't have an official like onboarding program. We didn't have any ongoing like training either. So we were at like a lull in hiring at the point that I came on board. So I like started whipping together kind of the onboarding stuff. And as we've kind of been on the platform, and as I've been there for a year now, looking back, anything that essentially we were creating for ongoing stuff. So if we launched a product, if we launched a new process, basically I would look at it and be like, is this relevant for our onboarding class? And usually it is, maybe not all at once, but it's usually relevant for like brand new folks coming into the organization. So you kind of have to sit down and think to yourself, like, what is the existing floor missing? Are they missing like soft skill training? Are they missing process training? Are they missing tool training?
Right.
What are they missing, for the existing floor? And then inevitably, if you're creating that content, the new people that are coming on board are going to need to use it anyway. So like our onboarding content that we have right now is constantly reiterated based on the new content that we're creating for like moving forward. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so like, I know a lot of people when they start creating content, to save time in the future and just to make sure that this is something that they can use throughout, the year or years to come. How do you go about thinking about scaling your content and like the strategy you go into actually building it out?
Yeah. So when we first started building our onboarding program, everything was basically in person. It was all of our sales team is actually in person, like in our office right now. So we were like, well, of course, we're just going to have everything like in person, and that's what we're going to teach. We quickly realized after a couple of onboarding classes that like we just couldn't, like, if I look forward into my crystal ball and I see that I've got 100 more people that are going to come on board in the next like year plus, obviously this was like pre-COVID kind of
Right.
craziness, but like there's no way that like me and my specialist are going to be able to continue this. So like, how do you make it consumable and how do you make it kind of self-serve? I learned this from my manager at Alteryx that like, people a lot of times, especially adults, want to consume content a lot of times in training on their own terms. So making it available to them whenever they have time, if it's late at night or if it's in line at the airport or if it's like they've got their morning coffee first thing in the morning, like that not only allows them to be able to do it on their terms, but it also allows it to be scalable. So like whatever you're training on, you can also train the person who's coming in 6 months later versus an in-person training where basically all of that information is kind of lost.
Right.
So scalability, especially in like hypergrowth, which I know we're going to talk about in a little bit, is huge. It's vitally important to kind of get that muscle built sooner rather than later.
Right. And I think even on top of that, the fact that you're saying, have some self-serve content, I think one of the biggest things too is how do you get people to actually do the self-serve content? Because there's people who are already exhausted with their, online trainings that they have to do. How do you make it to where they're like, oh yeah, you know what? I have an extra 5 minutes. Why don't I look at this training?
Yeah, creating a culture of learning is not an easy task.
Right.
People they just don't like training a lot of times because it's been like boring in the past. It's not
Right.
relevant. When they go through it, it's usually like their manager is forcing them to go through something. And sometimes you do need an element of that. Like you need to go to the manager and be like, look, guys, I really need you to like push this down and like make sure that they go through it. But what I found is it can be super helpful is like, in order to earn the trust of the team that you're supporting, you need to make whatever content it is that you're presenting like relevant to them. Why is this going to help them? How, especially for training like salespeople, anytime that you're taking them off of the phone, off of LinkedIn prospecting, like
Right.
off of demos or whatever, they need a valid reason as to like why you're doing this. So if you can create that content and make it relevant as like, what's in it for me? It's a little bit selfish, but you do have to think like that. If they're taking time away from their day job, how is this going to help them do their day job better?
Right.
So like, as an example, I rolled out a finance and accounting, like 101 training to make sure that our reps understood our personas and like what their daily lives were. And I propositioned it to them, essentially telling them that like, if you can't empathize with the people that you're on the phone with, they're going to know, they're going to know that you have no idea what you're talking about. And so like being able to like put it in the lens of what's in it for me, how's this going to help me hit my quota, how is this going to help me get to President's Club, that's an essential kind of aspect to any training that you're rolling out to make it relevant for them and make them want to do it.
Right. Make it worth their while, people.
Exactly.
All right. So what would you say is a good time frame for onboarding?
That's a good question. And I've kind of seen it all over the board. It really does depend on your business, and it depends on what you're selling. If you're selling a super complicated problem or a super complicated solution, the onboarding experience is probably going to take a lot longer. My last company, we were in kind of the database world, which is incredibly complicated. There's a lot to it. There's a lot to know. So like our onboarding program was like pretty long.
What was it over there?
We had about between like 4 to 6 weeks of pre-work that they were doing in our learning management system. And then, and take note of this, it's not like 8 hours a day of like 4 to 6 weeks. It was like, we did chunk it out. So it was like, do an hour here, do an hour there. And like, we made sure that we were kind of methodical with that, but it was like 4 to 6 weeks of pre-work. Then they came in person for a week-long onboarding experience. And then they had another couple weeks of post-work after that. But it was super complicated. Like the sales cycles were super long. We needed that amount of time to be able to like really make sure that the reps were like up and going. At Divvy, our sales cycle is not long. Our product is really easy to understand. It's pretty intuitive, and as is the space that we're in. So honestly, like our onboarding program right now is about 2 weeks. But like, I do want to go back in there because I know that we're missing stuff. So like start with something and then reiterate on it. Like it shouldn't just be like, this is my onboarding program. It's set in stone. Nothing is changing. We're done with it. And like, congratulations people. This is it. I've done it. Like,
I've done it all.
It should always be changing and like get that feedback. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later too.
Yeah, definitely. Actually it's on the next question here because, how do you know it's working? And like, when would you go into revamp it? What are some signs that, okay, this is out of date. We need to go ahead and redo this.
Yeah. So ideally you should know when like something is out of date or like a process or a training is like not relevant anymore. I would highly recommend that you're like nimble enough to maybe like not revamp the entire program, but like based on feedback that you're getting from reps. Like, so I take a survey of the reps that go through my onboarding program. The first survey is right after they complete the boot camp. Yeah, there you go. You've got the survey questions. So like right after boot camp, I asked them some questions like, how would you rate, Divvy Academy? What are some of the things that you learned? What are some things that we didn't do great? What are some things that we did do great? Like, give me kind of the feedback. How was the length of the program, et cetera. And then I check back in with them 30 to 60 days after they've been in the program, because inevitably they've been on the sales floor for long enough at that point that they realize maybe like what's going on. And the 30-day check-in actually helped shine light on the fact that like we were actually pushing too much information right off the bat at our sales reps. So like it can be really easy when you're creating an onboarding program to think like, we have so much to teach you. You have so much that you need to know. Like here's everything like right at you, like all at once. And I had a sales rep that actually told me, he was like, this was like really, really good. And looking back, I realized that I needed to know it. However, I didn't need to know it for like 3 weeks. And by the time I got to that point, I had to go back and like ask somebody else what it was. So like start figuring out like your sales rep's journey in the organization, like through onboarding, and try and like stagger out the onboarding stuff as they go. That way they're getting the information. So it should kind of be like a funnel. It starts like super high level at the top, and then you like keep like funneling it down almost to like their day job and like what they need to know. Salesforce processes and like stuff like that should be at the very bottom. Do not tell them like Salesforce processes right at the very top, because they're not going to remember. They're not going to remember.
That's key. I think that's great. Something that came in as another question, when you were building the enablement function at Divvy, how did you establish a relationship with the revenue leadership team? And how did you describe your relationship with them now with a more established enablement team? That's a great question, John.
It's a really good question. So I kind of just came in like a bull in a china shop, and I was like, hey guys, like I'm here. Whether that was a good approach or not,
I can see it. I
don't really know. But I basically was just like, I need to meet with you. I need to meet with you. I need to meet with you. And essentially like my first question to all of the leadership, and I would usually start kind of like, I started with the frontline managers actually first. They were the ones that I wanted to get to know the best, because they're the ones that kind of have their ears to the ground. And my first question to them a lot of times was, what has been your experience with enablement in the past? Like, because enablement, like I've said, is like different at every company. They could hate enablement, which means they probably don't like you already, or they could love enablement, which means they're a little bit more open to it. So like if you have the managers, and I've worked with those before, who are super skeptical of like what it is that you're doing, you kind of have to take a little bit of time and like get to know them. This is where like take like a psychology class online, or like find one of those, especially like right now, there's a bunch of courses online. Get into like the brain of people and learn like how you could potentially like win them over depending on their personality type or whatever it is. So like when I came on board, it was meet with the frontline managers first, and then I met with some of the executives, and like over time it's gotten much, much better. And I've realized that like instead of waiting around for someone to like come in and be like, hey, I know that you're in enablement, like I want to introduce myself, you need to take the initiative and be like, I'm in enablement, I need to introduce myself. What do you need? What are you seeing? Like, what can I help you fix? So like kind of be a little bit outside. And I'm an introvert, so it's hard for me to come in guns a-blazing. Like,
I don't believe it.
I really am. So like, it's not easy for me to like walk up to somebody and be like, hi, I'm Stephanie, I'm in enablement. Like, we need to get to know each other. But in that kind of like situation, you have to put yourself out of the comfort zone.
Oh, cool. John has another great question, but I'm going to move that until we get to our second topic because it's super relevant to that.
Cool.
But just last question on this topic is, how do you build training for a topic outside your expertise?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. Surprise, surprise, I am not an expert in like finance and accounting, or in databases at my last company, or in analytics at my last company. Like, I don't have information on a lot of that stuff. So like the key is to make friends across the organization, or even outside of the organization, just in like a network. And like, people are super kind of like humbled and like grateful if you go to them and be like, you know something and I need help. Like, I need kind of your brain dump. And that was something that like we've done. I've tried to do at all of my other companies. Like, don't assume that you can be the expert. Like, that's okay. You're not an expert. It's somebody that is an expert that can help like explain those topics. And then hopefully you can come in and put like the lens on it that's going to help them understand it. So like when I was doing like databases, how am I going to help a salesperson understand what Apache Cassandra is and like a database is and like all of that stuff? How are we going to put it in a language that makes sense to them? So like utilize the resources that you have. And a lot of times who you're selling to, or your target persona, you typically have like in-house somewhere. So like we have finance and accounting professionals, like we had analysts at Alteryx, and utilize them and leverage them to the best of your ability. Some people don't want to be in front of a group. Cool. It'll just be like you and me, like let's videotape you in a conference room, like answering some questions. That's great. Bring them into boot camp if they're willing to be in front of people. And then like incentivize them. One fun thing that we did at Alteryx was like, we would give people, like, we couldn't like monetarily provide anything to them, but like at kickoff for the next year, we actually had our list of people that came into boot camp, and we gave them like front of the line tickets for like the bar or food or something like that. Like they had a special like plaque that said like boot camp all-star or something like that. Little things like that. People love that stuff. They love it. So like take advantage of the people that you have internally. If you don't have those people internally, look outside, and that's how you can get that information. Don't expect to be an expert.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. So now moving on to our second topic of how to scale sales enablement during hypergrowth, which you have obviously experienced the last couple of years at Divvy. So, but numbers aside, what would you say are some key things to note if you're someone that is needing to scale quickly?
So one of the biggest things is going to be repeatability. So I kind of touched on this a little bit before. If you've got folks that are coming in all the time, like new hires that are coming in every single month or every couple of weeks, it's going to be essential that you start creating content that's going to be repeatable, just to keep yourself sane, to keep your managers sane. I started encouraging our managers to record themselves. So they were doing like outreach training for every new SDR that was coming on board, which was like every single week. And I was like, guys, you're killing yourselves. Like you have a day job, like record yourself going through this. I'll edit it. Like if you mess up or whatever, like I will take that and then create it and put it in a format that's going to be easily digestible for folks. But repeatability is like huge. And then to that point, like self-serve content, create it in a format, whether you're using an LMS like WorkRamp or whether you've got it housed somewhere else. make sure that it's accessible and that they can get to it whenever they have time, and make sure that you like remind them that it's there. Don't just put it somewhere and then assume that they're going to remember where to go. Direct them to it, like beat them over the head with it a little bit in a
Right.
nice way, as far as like where they can find it. Because especially when you've got so much going on, you're just like, I'm sure it's somewhere. I don't remember where it is. I don't have time to look for it, whatever. Like, I'm just going to like
Right.
figure it out or ask somebody else. Try and capture all of that and make it easily accessible. And then additionally, like one of the things that I found super helpful in this role at Divvy was that like I had to reach outside of Divvy and like kind of expand my sales enablement network and like reach out to other people because I didn't know things. I was like, obviously, like nobody knows everything. And if you're the smartest person in the room, go in a different room. Like you should never
Yeah.
be kind of in that situation. So like reach out. The enablement community especially are some of the nicest people that I have ever encountered. Reach out to folks. If you need
Right.
intros, message me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to make intros. Like there are so many smart people out there that have such great ideas. Don't be afraid to reach out to somebody else to get ideas, like fresh ideas.
Right. Cool. So moving on to the next question. So, and this also ties into one of the questions that we just received. So how do you measure effectiveness of the enablement function? So one of the questions that came through on our Q&A was, as an enablement professional, one challenge I come across over and over is establishing the value of our team's function is bringing to our company. I'm curious if you have a metrics that demonstrate the value.
It's a great question. And I know so many people ask this question. And I ask other people this question too. One of the things that like I didn't do great when I first started at Divvy is I didn't do like benchmark metrics or even
Right.
figure out what I wanted to measure and how I was going to be able to like measure my program. I jumped right in and I just like started swimming instead of like taking a beat and figuring out what I wanted that to look like. So essentially, like there should be a couple of buckets that you as enablement are concerned with and that can be easy-ish to track and it can be kind of hard. So like onboarding is a great one. So like start taking metrics as far as like how long does it take before somebody is getting their first deal? How long is it taking before they get their second deal? Because maybe the first one
Right.
was a fluke or it was already in the pipeline. How long does it take them to get quota? What's your average like deal age? Is it going up? Is it going down? What's your average like deal size? If you're able to tell like how often or how long deals are staying in opportunity stages, that's another great one for onboarding. So like onboarding metrics should be one aspect or one element.
Right.
Sales like cost of customer acquisition could be another one. So like how long is it taking for you to acquire a customer? And all of that is basically like, again, like sales stages. How long are they staying in the sales stages? How long is your
Right.
opportunity status? Like that can kind of prove moving forward. And I think I'll try and like remember some of the other ones that I have like written down. I know I have it saved on my computer, and then you guys can like share it
Yeah,
out a little
perfect.
bit later.
Yeah.
But onboarding is usually like the easiest thing to tackle. And then think about like productivity kind of metrics. So one of the things that like when I spun up my content management system, it's a Google site, so it's free because I didn't have the budget to do an LMS and a CMS. I tied it to Google Analytics. And now I can see like how many people are using that page, how
Oh,
long they're spending
nice.
on the page, stuff like that. So it's not like definitive metrics in that particular case necessarily, but those are metrics where you can start using and be like, hey guys, I did this project and I spun it up and now we've got an average of 50 people visiting the site a day or whatever it is, and they're visiting like this piece of it. That's something that you can use for like productivity and stuff. Like before that, where were they going? What were they doing?
Right.
Who
I
knows?
think, and I think that's great. I think that's a great tip for people who are looking to track metrics and things like that. And you did mention that you would say like onboarding is the low hanging fruit. Which one would you say is kind of the hardest ones to make a change with?
Hardest ones when it comes to like metrics and
Yeah.
measuring those, probably the existing sales floor. So one of the things that like, depending on what you're doing, like the overall enablement program is going to be difficult to kind of figure out. And it should like work with your executives and figure out what are you expecting from me and from my team and from the enablement function as a whole. That could help you zero in on like some of the metrics that you should be kind of focused on. But if you're figuring out like a process or a new like big project, if you're running or rolling out a new sales methodology, for example, like it's a huge project that you're going to want to like measure the effectiveness of, figure out what those metrics are going to look like. Is it going to be like, do you have a new field in Salesforce? How often are they filling it out? How long does it take them to fill it out? Like figure out with like maybe your Salesforce admins, are there things that we can track in Salesforce that are going to show, you know, productivity metrics or whatever it is? Are items moving through the funnel faster after we've implemented this new methodology? Are they moving slower? Is it because and then you can kind of infer it's because sales reps aren't understanding it fully. So you can kind of figure it out from there. This is a tricky one. Like, and I've had a lot of people ask me about that. And I know a lot of people talk about this at like conferences and stuff. It's not easy. So if you're running into this and you're like, wow, I'm stupid, I'm the only person that is not understanding how to do this. You're not. This is difficult. This is not easy to do.
So I guess to tack on to that, how would you know if this is something that maybe was just misunderstood, that you did explain it well, and like the methodology, the new one that you're presenting is just not working? How do you know like where the problem lies with that?
That one can be a little bit tricky. One of the things that like I kind of would rely on there is like look at the data first and then reach out to like the reps and the frontline managers. What are they struggling with the most? Is it like we're not seeing adoption with the sales methodology? Is it because I didn't explain well enough what was in it for you and how this is going to help? Oftentimes if you're rolling out like new areas in Salesforce for them to fill out, all they see is admin work. How is this going to help them move a deal along? So if you're rolling out like MedPick or something like that, like you have to enter in each of the acronyms for that, and they're just like, this is a bunch of like busy work that I can't deal with right now. And you have to make it relevant and you have to make them understand. Is it because we didn't do a good enough job of explaining what's expected of you, or we didn't do a good enough job of explaining how this is going to help you up level your sales or move them forward or get, you know, further along? Things like that, like sales methodologies that you're rolling out in particular, should ideally move the sales cycle forward. So you need to kind of at every single step explain how it's going to do that. It's not just do this because I said so. It's do this so that you can get more deals in the pipeline or move them through faster.
Right. Awesome. God, Stephanie, you're amazing. So all right. So with everything going on in the world currently, how has your enablement program changed due to COVID-19?
Yeah. So enablement as a function in general should be pretty nimble to kind of move with the flow of the business. And that's usually like this. And all of a sudden COVID was like, like all of a sudden, like just off the charts. So Divvy especially, like we kind of shifted focus here for a little bit. We've been focusing a lot on helping the small businesses get access to the payroll protection loans. So we've shifted like completely kind of opposite to focus on that initiative to make sure that we're helping a lot of our customer base get access to the funds that they need. As a result of that, our reps who are talking to these people need to understand everything about the program itself. In this case, me and Scott actually did have to become experts in the SBA, like PPP loan, which is crazy. I never thought I was going to be reading laws and bills and like translating them.
Sounds like exciting.
It was just super exciting. But there wasn't anybody, this was one of those weird cases where there wasn't anybody else who was an expert in it. So like we had to do our best to kind of transition that. But the entire time in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, this is what we have to do right now to support our sales reps, to support our business as a whole. But what am I thinking once everything's kind of like levels out and calms down again? What are the things that I need to like start prioritizing and working on? So like in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, well, we've paused hiring for the moment to figure out like where everything kind of lands. This is the perfect time for me to be figuring out onboarding. Like if you're not hiring and your priorities haven't shifted as drastically as ours did, think about the things that like you should be thinking about like right now. Like onboarding is a great one. If you're not bringing on new people, take a look at your onboarding program and see if there's stuff that you need to adjust. Like, this is the perfect time to do it. If you just like had kickoff for like sales kickoff or like, you know, company kickoff or whatever it is, maybe start plotting out what you want to do like next year. Think about the future and what that looks like. This is honestly the perfect time to kind of start tackling some of those projects that usually fall to the back burner, and you're like, I'll deal with these later. I'll deal with these later. I'll deal with these later.
No, I think that's so true with, you know, enablement. I feel like with this hiring freeze that a lot of companies are seeing, this is the perfect time to start revamping that, because honestly, I feel like when new people come in, there's just no time because you're constantly trying to train more people coming in.
Exactly.
So now with this freeze, people have that opportunity to kind of just look at everything and start planning for the future.
Yep.
So I believe most of your enablement team, if they are in office, how do you go about maintaining the connectedness with everyone while working remote?
Yeah, that one, it was a bit of a shift for Divvy specifically, like culturally, because everybody was in office. And we tested out a couple of different things. So one of my favorite things to use is Kahoot games, which if you guys aren't familiar with them, Google it. It's Kahoot. And they're just fun little games. And what we did was we actually looped them in right at the beginning to kind of ease people into the transition of not being around each other all the time.
Right.
It's gotten much better, but like we were actually running 2 Kahoot games a day. So like one of them was like fun, stupid, silly kind of Kahoot game where we would do. And then another one was actually reinforcement on like our product or our processes. So like it was a great opportunity to kind of like get in some fun. And then like the other one was kind of reinforcement with some like, but in a fun way. So it was like reinforcing on like, what are our policies around like being able to use like the Divvy credit card? What's our product? What are some of the things, maybe some of the products that we just recently released? Like, let's go back in and double check that they understand that. How do they interact with other, you know, departments or whatever it is? So those are some of the things that we took advantage of.
Right.
I just posted on LinkedIn the other day, somebody, Preston at Podium, who's actually here in the Utah area too. They actually, as part of a morale booster and like kind of getting around like spiff incentives have usually kind of been either like nixed or cut way back.
Right.
So one of their spiffs was actually that they would get to choose the VP of sales, like Slack handle and picture for like 24 hours. Like, that's a great idea.
That is a great idea.
And I was like, this is amazing. Like, it doesn't cost any money. It's easy to implement. It's morale boosting, like stuff like that. So thinking outside of the box and being able to kind of do that stuff, I think is hugely important in times like this.
That's incredible. I'm going to pass that along to my team. Like change our CEO's handles.
The reps loved it.
Yeah. So now moving on to our final topic for today. So it's going to be tips on tool adoption as well as rep engagement. So I want to start off with a couple of questions for you. So how do you make cost benefit analysis for evaluating new tools? And how do you decide when is the best time to look for a different tool?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think especially now in the situation that we're all finding ourselves in, a lot of budgets are kind of like being pulled back. Sometimes, like I know we even internally have started looking at our vendor list and be like, are we using this? Are we using it? Whatever.
Right.
So this is actually a really great time. And whether it's prompted by this or it's prompted by just your annual kind of budget review in general, take a look at your tech stack and figure out, are you actually utilizing everything to its fullest potential? When we were going through our vendor list, we started realizing we're like, well, we're using it, but like, I feel like there's way more capability that like isn't being utilized. At some of my last companies, we went through like our vendor list and we were like, nobody's even using this. I don't know that I see kind of a benefit here. Like maybe we won't renew. So it kind of depends. And I keep saying this and it sucks because it's just kind of my talk track, but it depends on your business. Like a drinking game every time I say that, take a shot. But like it does kind of depend on your business. Like take a look, take a poll, like get a feel for like not just the people that are using it, but maybe the managers too. We've done that a couple of times as we ask the managers like, hey, what's your engagement with like this particular tool? And they're like, oh, we love it. We use it all the time. We had no idea the managers were using it. Like, oh, that's fantastic. fantastic. Like maybe we need to better enable them to use it to its fullest potential. If you see if you're maybe like mid-contract, you can't get out of something, but you're not seeing the adoption that you want with the tool, re-engage with the CSM. That's what they're there for. That's their entire role. So like reach out to them. I guarantee you they're going to be so excited that you reach out to them. Because their entire like role and function is to make sure that like, one, you renew on kind of a, for a business level, but two, to take care of you. Like that should be a good CSM. That's their job, is to take care of you and make sure that you're using the tool and that you know how to use the tool. So reach out to them and figure out like, hey, we're like, can you take a look at our analytics, or like what's our usage or whatever? Like what are some tips and tricks that you've seen at other companies that you're working with that maybe we're not taking advantage of, or that we didn't even know? Stuff like that. So if you're going through and like doing cost analysis, like what is the ROI on this product? Are we actually getting anything out of it? If you're not, and you want to like, and you do want to get something out of it, go to the company. Don't just sit there and struggle on your own and try and figure it out. Like they have resources for you. Any good company is going to have a support system there. So like reach out to them and take advantage of what they have to offer. They want you to use their product. Take advantage of it.
I think that's awesome that you mentioned that, because I feel like a lot of companies, like the tool may be really good, but it's underutilized because maybe people don't know how to use it, or, things like that, or they misunderstood something, or there's tool pieces or aspects of the tool that they're not using. And so I think that's great that you pointed it out, to go to the CSM or go to the company to get a better understanding of how they could actually be using it better.
Yeah, our IT team internally actually does a really good job of this on our general channel for like everybody. I think it's like IT Tip Tuesday or Thursday or one of those two. It's like one of those things, but they like will add in tips for like Zoom or Okta or whatever it is that we're using, and we're just like, holy crap, like I had no idea this could do this. Like it's fantastic. And you could do the same thing with enablement. Like if you've got an LMS, or if you've got like a content management system or outreach or SalesLoft or like whatever, any tool that they're using, go to the CSM, go to their website, go to their blog or whatever, find some like tips and tricks, and just be like, did you know, like it could be like a did you know Fridays or something like that. Like start something a little bit kind of like fun, where people can actually, like, it's actionable stuff. Don't just go like, hey, did you know that you can search in here? Like that's not like fully, like that's not like great, but like figure out what's something that like people maybe don't know about a product, and then track the engagement across it, or have your CSM and the vendor track the engagement across it.
Right. I like that. So then how often would you do a tech stack audit?
I mean, ideally, you should be doing it. You should probably like get a list of all of the technologies that enablement kind of covers, and start looking at it at least 6 months before the contract is due, because typically their renewal team or their CSM is going to reach out 3 months before a contract is due, to start re-engaging and making sure that you are going to pay your bill again.
Right.
So ideally, like internally, you should be doing it like at 6 months prior to a tool kind of coming up for renewal. That doesn't always happen, and that's okay. Like it doesn't happen with us. We're like, oh crap, that's coming up for renewal. Like okay, so like sometimes that can be like hard to kind of manage, but ideally, like do it as often as you can, and try and keep a pulse on, what are people using, and how often are they using it, and to what extent are they using it. Sometimes you could even find out, like we actually had a tool across the floor that like I was completely unaware that our sales reps were using, and the sales rep at the company reached out. He was like, did you know? And I was like, I didn't know. Like, what is happening?
Where's the training on this, Stephanie?
No. So like people are like, oh yeah, this is a great tool. I'm like, guys, like share this with me. So like sometimes you have that happen too, where reps will just like go and find tools on their own, which is fine. And I would say like encourage them, don't discourage that from happening. Encourage them to know that you have an open door policy to like bring those into.
Right. That's great. So then for sales enablement tools, when is the best time to include them in your strategy rollout? So like a CMS or an LMS?
It's a tricky question, because
just throw it in there whenever you guys.
you don't like in a perfect world. And sometimes this happens. I haven't experienced it myself, but I've heard about it.
Okay.
Sometimes at the beginning of the year, like your manager or whatever will be like, Stephanie, you have $100,000 to just choose whatever products you want. Like go forth and like take some demos.
It's Christmas. Go
It's
for it.
Christmas. You get a vendor stipend. I've never experienced that before. I'm hoping it will happen at some point in my life. But sometimes like you kind of have to make a case for a product. I get prospected to a lot and sometimes a lot of times actually you have to make the case for a specific system. So like when I came on board for Divvy, I took stock of everything that was going on and I went to our leadership and I was like, we need a content management system and we need a learning management system. And they were like, that's great. You have budget for one, choose one. So I was like, okay. So I ended up like, you kind of have to figure out like what makes the most sense. And then if you can't find budget for it, like, or you can't figure out how to make it work, figure out like be a little bit scrappy with ways to do it. Like I didn't have budget for both, so I ended up choosing an LMS because I knew that was going to help me with scalability and repeatability. And content management, I actually went out into my network and I asked a few of the enablement folks at other companies, what have you done in the past, and learned about this like Google site idea, and then was able to leverage that. So I'm for free building a use cases around content management in the future when we get to that point of having budget. And it's one of those things where if you can be scrappy with stuff, be scrappy with stuff. Your leadership team will take note of that instead of you just coming and asking like, I need budget, I need budget, I need budget. Instead, you can say like, hey, I did this. Let me prove out kind of this like proof of concept and how this is going to work. And then I'm going to come to you with an example as far as like what we can do.
Right. Well, so one thing I had a question about is you said you reached out to your network. Are these friends, past people that you've worked with, people on LinkedIn that you don't know, you just reached out to? Because I think a lot of these people are coming in and maybe it might be their first time role in enablement and they don't even know where to start. So yeah, how did you make those connections? Are they within your network of people or friends?
It was a little bit of both. So the gal that actually introduced me to the Google site, I met through last year. I did a talk at the Outreach Unleashed conference. And she came up to me afterwards and introduced herself and we kind of like kicked things off from there. I actually have a couple of people that I've kept in contact through there. Outside of that, like some of them are people that I've worked with in the past. A lot of them are just people that I've found on LinkedIn. It's easy to kind of just go and search for sales enablement on LinkedIn and add a note along with it and just be like, I'm looking to, kind of engage with other sales enablement people. It'd be great to get your thoughts or feelings around like this, that, and everything. And don't just like ask from people. Cause like, I get that a lot when I'm being prospected to, like, do you have time? Do you have time? Do you have 5 minutes? And I'm like, no, I don't. Like, and it's the same thing if you're
Yeah.
networking, like offer something like, hey, can I buy you a coffee? Like, can I Venmo you
Right.
like $5 so you can grab a coffee, or offer something in advance? Like offer it to be like a discussion instead of just like, I have so many questions for you and want to like word vomit all over you.
Right.
That can help and be like a sounding board between the two. But honestly, like for sales enablement folks, like join the Sales Enablement Society. That's like ses.org, I think. Google it, Sales Enablement Society. It's a thing. You
I
can engage
swear it's a
people there.
thing.
I promise. Accelerate Sales is another one. Like you can go on LinkedIn. If you need like recommendations, reach out to me. I'm happy to make connections, but it's been slow and steady, kind of usually through like LinkedIn or like other connections that way.
Nice. Okay, so then our last couple of questions. So for tool adoption, how do you get reps, sales leadership, and cross-functional stakeholders to buy in? And also on top of that, like how did you do it at Divvy? Because
Yeah.
there's so many people with different learning styles. How did you go about that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And for like tool adoption, again, you have to make it worth their while and you have to make it relevant to their role. Like you need to make sure that it's what's in it for me. Like,
Right.
why should I use this tool? And if you can get past that, then you kind of like have to kind of use the adoption kind of techniques. And one of the things is like always make sure that your frontline managers are enabled on the tool that you're trying to roll out, because they can be champions for you, or they can just like I need you to do this. Can you just do me
Right.
a solid and just get this done for me? Like, it needs to be done. They can kind of put that pressure on them if need be. Start with your frontline managers, make sure that they're enabled, because usually, depending on the tool that you're using, there's going to be like a manager portal of some way, shape, or form that they can track their team. So make sure that they're enabled, and then like train your sales reps on it. One of the things that like I did with WorkRamp when we rolled it out was I wanted to make sure that like people had some fun with it. It wasn't just like, hey, we've got this new learning management system. Here's a 3-hour course for like as an intro for you. So we did a couple of things with the intro. Like we had it kind of figured out. So we were changing messaging, we were changing branding. So that was the basically like the meat and the potatoes that I needed people to do, but I let them kind of have a dessert first. So when we first rolled out WorkRamp to the organization, the first guide that we rolled out was actually Scott whipped it together in like 5 minutes, and we utilized literally every single thing in the guide like layout. So it was a Starburst guide basically explaining how pink Starbursts are the best flavor of Starbursts, and we like tested them on it too. So we were like, what's your favorite flavor? And if they didn't answer pink, they got it wrong. And when we first rolled it out, I monitored it basically the first half of the day, and whoever like went through and completed it, I had a bag of Starburst, and I would drop a pile of Starburst at their desks.
I
And
love
they were
that.
so excited. They got candy. So I gave them a dessert first. And then the second part of it was actually one of the things, especially with their learning management system, and most all of them do this, is the video coaching. It's really hard for people to kind of like have a video of themselves, like talking out,
Right.
like messaging or whatever, and getting them comfortable with that can be a hurdle that you have to get over. So I actually, thought up basically we ran an air guitar like lip sync contest through the video recording aspect of it. So it's kind of like shoving vegetables in your kids like
They don't
pancakes or
even know
something. They
it.
don't even know what's happening. So like I'm having them record themselves in a fun kind of way. We were lucky enough to like roll a spiff around it, so they actually got money if they were voted for it.
Right.
But that's how we introduced the product. We did a lip sync air guitar contest, and we had really, really great results. And now when I roll out like an elevator pitch or whatever, like they're a little bit more, one, they know how to use the tool. So there's
Right.
that barrier already like down, is they've already used it in a fun way. And then two, they feel a little bit more comfortable. It's still weird. Like there's no doubt about it. It's still weird to record yourself like that. The barrier to entry is at least a little bit lower for them to go into it. And they're like, they can't say they don't know how to use it, and they can't say they'll like
Right.
it's already a little
No
bit lower.
excuses.
Exactly. It's still like a hurdle to get over, but it's a fun way to kind of encourage like culture and morale and stuff like that. I'm actually thinking about doing it again since we're all working
Yes.
from home. I want to do a second like annual lip sync contest. So I think I might do that again.
In the comfort of your own home now. That's
Exactly. It's perfect. So I think we could do that again, but yeah, that's one of the things that I did.
No, I think that's great, because I think a lot of people honestly don't even know how to approach even implementing this or introducing this. And a lot of the times, even an LMS, other past LMSs may have left a bad taste in people's mouth, and they're like, oh, great, we got another
Yeah.
one. Like, what's going to be different about this one? So the fact that you got creative and rolled it out the way you did, I thought was amazing.
And don't be afraid to have fun. Like, just because we're adults and like we're in the
Right?
working world,
Thank
like
you.
have some fun with it, you guys. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. People will like it. And it also like breaks down that barrier of like, whether you're in L&D or whether you're in enablement or whatever, like now you're fun, like you're
Right.
approachable. You're not just like this trainer who's, here to make their lives like longer and, more boring or whatever. Like you've removed that barrier. Like you seem more human. The product seems more usable. Like it's a good tactic kind of across the board.
Right. No, I think that's really great. And I think one of the last things I wanted to point out before we wrapped things up was when we were preparing for this webinar and we did our dry run, I remember at the very end, I just looked at everything that we had talked about, and I was like, oh my gosh, like she's a rock star. Like, how does she know all of this? And I asked her, I was like, how do you go about doing all these things? And I remember you laughing at me and be like, no, I don't do all these things. I just know I should be doing all these things. So
Yes.
I would love for you to expand a little bit more on that for the people listening, on the fact that maybe, you can't do everything that's listed here that we've discussed.
Yeah. Enablement, like, and everything that falls under the purview of enablement is a very long list. And there are always things like, oh, I need to be like revamping my onboarding, and I need to look at contracts, and then I need to do this, and then I need to do that. And like, you need to keep up with everything. And like, oh, but how am I like tracking my enablement program to make sure that I can prove value to the company? Like, you guys, it's a lot of stuff. And what I just like brain dumped on you, and what I brain dumped on like Monica last week, was like, it was a lot. And like, I'm not doing everything. It's kind of like, if you guys have seen like the triangle of like when you're in like college or something, like you can be like, you can eat well, and then you can do your schoolwork, and then you can have a social life, and you can only really choose two of those things. It's the same thing. It's the same idea. Like, you can really only choose two of those things, sometimes even only one, depending on like what's going on.
Right.
And that's okay. Like, work with your leadership, work with your manager, work with your executives to figure out like, what are my priorities right now, or what should we be focusing on, and make sure that you kind of touch base with them like constantly to make sure that you're doing that. Like, we're going to be making a push for the new year for like new reps. Great. Onboarding is going to be my focus, and I'm going to want to track that to make sure that all of the new people that are coming on are actually like meeting the standards that we need them to meet. Like, have those conversations with them, or like, hey, we're seeing like low productivity across the floor or whatever. Perfect. Let me send out a survey, or let me like have some, coffee dates or whatever with like
Right.
managers and reps to figure out what they're missing. Like, let's look into the data. Don't think that you can do it all unless you have a magnificently like huge team, which is very possible. If you do, by all means, like, try
Great
and do
job.
it all. Like, I'm so jealous. But if you're just like a team of like one or two in my case, or like a team of like even 10, like, you still like, it's still hard to cover everything. Choose what makes the most sense for you, for your business, for your team, and then make sure you communicate that to the higher ups, and be like, we're going to focus on this for this quarter or this half or whatever it is, and then then we'll put your request in the pipe kind of for the next quarter, or moving forward, whatever it is.
Awesome. Well, to wrap things up, I want to go ahead and thank everyone who joined our webinar this morning. And of course, a big thank you to Stephanie for coming on and sharing her personal experiences with us, and some other things that she's learned throughout her career so far. So before we go, I do want to note that everyone who's registered for this webinar today, we will be receiving an email with the presentation as well as this recording linked. So be on the lookout for that. And until next time, everybody, I hope you all have a great Wednesday, or whatever day you feel like it is, because they all just merged together. So.
Wait, it's Friday, right?
Right.
They say it's Friday.
I woke up yesterday thinking it was Monday. So the fact that it was Tuesday, I was like, great. But again,
Awesome.
Thank you all so much, Stephanie. I hope you have a great day, and thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
All right, bye.